I went to visit my maternal grandfather's house on a hot summer day for the first time in ages, in order to sort through some belongings. But no one lived in that house anymore. I was working alone, and because the house was unnecessarily large, I wasn't making much progress. In the largest room of the house stood a big family Buddhist altar. It hadn't been tended to for a long time and was covered in dust, but I needed to move it. Given how dirty it was, I decided to carefully wipe the area around it with an old rag that I didn't use much. Between the altar and the wall, I found several items wedged in, such as thumbtacks and other bits of trash. In that dark little gap, I noticed a single notebook stuck there. It wasn't easy to move the heavy altar all by myself, but I somehow managed to create enough space to slip my hand in and grab that notebook. I could tell it was very old. It had turned a muddy brown color, was all wrinkled, and clearly hadn't been treated with any care. What caught my eye most were the reddish-black stains in places. Those stains weren't just on the cover, they also appeared on the inside pages after I opened it. In that moment, the thought crossed my mind, could these be old bloodstains that had changed color over time? And not only that, these stains looked as though the notebook had been soaked in blood. I felt an intensely unpleasant sensation, a kind of unspeakable creepiness. But at the same time, I was curious, so I began flipping through the pages. Inside, there were complex lines that never fully formed into letters, most likely drawn in ink, and bizarre, incomprehensible drawings. Much of it was obscured by those reddish-black stains. My grandfather passed away when I was 10. My grandmother, who must have been over 90 by then, was physically weak and also suffered from dementia, so she was living in a care facility. In fact, she could no longer walk and was confined to bed, just waiting to die. She no longer spoke, and it was difficult to even tell whether she was awake or asleep most of the time. I had pretty much stopped visiting her entirely. I did have my share of memories tied to my grandparents' house, but since it was clear my grandmother would never be able to return there, the decision had been made to dispose of it. Before that could happen, I was tasked with sorting through its contents. I wondered if I should ask my mother about the notebook, but I felt hesitant to bring up something so unsettling to my relatives. Sometimes, there are things family members are better off not knowing. I had a feeling I wouldn't get a straightforward answer, anyway. However, I did know someone I could possibly talk to. There was an elderly woman in the neighborhood whom I was acquainted with. She was also quite old, but still active in farming, and she seemed very mentally sharp. She had lived in that area for a long time and had taken care of me when I was a child. Even as an adult, I always made sure to greet her whenever we met, and I was sure she might know something about the matter. That evening, as the sun was setting, I guessed she would have finished working in the fields and returned home, so I went to visit her. It had been a long time since we'd last talked, but she remembered me well. While updating her on my grandmother's current condition, I explained the situation and how I had come to find the notebook. When I showed her the notebook, it seemed she found it as disturbing as I did. She didn't appear to have an immediate recollection of it. But after staring at it for a while, she started talking as though she had remembered something. Here's what she told me. My grandfather's parents, that is, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, had both passed away when my grandfather was young, and he had a younger brother named Shuji. Apparently, Shuji had been born with a disability, he couldn't hear. Naturally, he also had difficulty speaking. Whether it was congenital or acquired wasn't clear, but he also had some kind of mental disturbance. My grandfather had raised his younger brother on his own, but because communication was so difficult and Shuji's odd behavior became more noticeable, my grandfather couldn't take his eyes off him. He couldn't even work properly. Over time, he began to resent his brother. So, he effectively confined Shuji to the house. Desperate to express his feelings and intentions, Shuji apparently poured all of that into a notebook. Then one day, the incident happened. After killing every chicken they owned at the time, using a sickle, Shuji then shoved a pair of chopsticks into his own ears and died. The chopsticks pierced through his ears and, as though struck with a hammer, went clear through his skull and into his brain. Naturally, both ears, as well as his eyes and nose, bled profusely. My grandfather testified that it was suicide, and that's how it was officially handled. But whether it was a suicide he truly wished for, a madness-fueled suicide, or even murder, meaning my grandfather had killed him, became a hot topic of gossip among the neighbors at the time. So, the elderly woman concluded the notebook had to be Shuji's. Night fell, and I went back to my grandfather's house, wondering what to do with the notebook. Eventually, I felt too tired from the unaccustomed physical work to keep thinking about it, so I left the notebook next to my pillow and went to sleep, figuring I could deal with it the next day. I must have fallen asleep right away. I'm not sure how long I slept, But I woke up to a noise. Rustle, rustle. Scratch, scratch. It sounded like something was crawling around, and it was right next to me, by my pillow. I felt a strangely warm air wafting in from that spot. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, I finally managed to see it. From Shuji's notebook, a single, thin arm was extending upward. It was as if it was sprouting naturally, like a plant, and that arm was bent at the elbow, clawing at the tatami mat. Rustle, rustle. Scratch, scratch. It was the sound of fingernails scraping the tatami. I leapt up from my bedding, but my legs gave out beneath me, probably from sheer terror. I couldn't stand, so I scrambled, rolling toward the corner of the room. My mind was overwhelmed by fear unlike anything I'd ever felt before, but I couldn't stop myself from watching what that arm would do next. It reached the pillow where I had been sleeping just moments before. Then, from the notebook, 2 eyes peered out. Little by little, its entire head emerged, and then... Ooh, ooh. A low moan rose from its mouth, a voice that didn't quite form words. Some sort of fluid leaked from around its lips. It might have been blood. My memory ends there. I must have passed out. When I came to, I was in my own familiar bed. Someone must have carried me. I had been brought back to my parents' home. What happened? My mother was there, asking me. What do you mean, what happened? Nothing happened? She asked, watching my expression. She didn't seem aware of any signs that something strange had occurred that night. No bloodstains, no scratches on the tatami. Right, the notebook. Was there no notebook in that room? I asked. There was nothing. I got worried when you didn't contact me, so I went to check on you. You'd collapsed, so I brought you home. I felt my head spinning with confusion. Had it all been a dream? Or was it real? I needed to go back and check. Though I was tired, my body seemed fine otherwise. I rested at home until morning, and then I went again to my grandfather's house, this time with my mother. In the room where I had slept, where I'd fainted from sheer terror, there was no notebook, no trace of blood anywhere. My mother had already put the bedding away. It was puzzling, but we finished cleaning up together. About half a year later, my grandmother passed away. She had been bedridden for so long that both my mother and I were somewhat prepared for this. We weren't especially grief-stricken, and the funeral was held at my grandfather's house. By then, I had practically forgotten that bizarre experience. But when I returned to my grandfather's house for the funeral, it all came back to me. I suddenly remembered the elderly woman to whom I had shown the notebook. I had completely forgotten about consulting with her, and I felt a strong urge to talk to her again and confirm what was real. She would definitely come to the funeral if she was still around. She was an old family friend. Even if she didn't come, I could visit her house nearby. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find her. So, I asked my mother. You remember the old lady in the neighborhood who used to farm? She's not here today, is she? My mother's reply was shocking. Oh, that lady passed away some time ago. I'm not sure exactly when, maybe about 5 years ago? I couldn't attend her funeral, but yes, she definitely died. I had no idea what to think. Then my mother continued with something even more startling. Everyone in the neighborhood knows this, but she had a chronic illness. Apparently, it was suicide. She died in a gruesome way. She stuck chopsticks into her ears. What was the real connection between Shuji and that old woman? And what exactly was that notebook? In the end, it all remained a mystery. Finally, I went once more to that old woman's house, but it had already been torn down.